we're going to embark on an important exercise over the next few videos of watching a 9 or 10 minute video from William Lane Craig talking about the topic, Did God Command Genocide in the Bible? And I'm going to offer my rebuttal point by point to the points that Craig makes. So let's get started.
Now, I have not in any way ever said that God has commanded or could command genocide. That's an unsympathetic misrepresentation of what I said. What I was dealing with are these narratives in the Hebrew Bible concerning God's commands to Israel to go into the land of Canaan, or the modern-day land of Palestine, and to drive out the Canaanite clans or tribes that were inhabiting the land. And in the Hebrew Bible, God commands Israelites to go in there and to slaughter any of the Canaanites that oppose them. Whether man, woman, or child, they are to be exterminated.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So the first thing Craig is saying here really is that, well, my view is not an endorsement of what is called genocide, but rather what is called ethnic cleansing, which is the forcible removal of people simply from a geographic region or territory, simply due to their religious, cultural, ethnic, and or racial identification. And that's what's happening here. The Canaanites are being forcibly expulsed from the land. This is a classic instance of what we today call ethnic cleansing. So Craig, at best, is moving from being a defender of genocide to a defender of ethnic cleansing. Most people today would recognize that ethnic cleansing is intrinsically a bad thing, a wrong thing, something to be avoided. But that's what Craig is defending here. Now, note as well that he then says that any men, women, or children who offered resistance would then be exterminated or terminated or killed. Anyway, notice first of all that he says children there. So any child who offers resistance would be killed. So what that entails then is it's not intrinsically wrong for an army that is invading a territory to kill children who offer any resistance to the army. And we know that it's not intrinsically wrong because we know that God, by definition, would not command something that was intrinsically wrong. So, because God commands it, it follows on Craig's view that it's not intrinsically wrong for soldiers to kill children who resist them. Now, let's put that in a concrete situation today. It follows from that that on Craig's view, when Israeli soldiers today bring a tank into Gaza, for example, if a 5-year-old boy throws a rock at the tank, the soldiers, in principle, could be justified in killing the boy, let's say shooting him or stabbing him to death or something else, because he offered resistance to their tank being within his territory. And now it may be wrong, but it's not intrinsically wrong because God cannot command things that are intrinsically wrong, and this, by definition, would be the same type of act as the killing of Canaanite children. So already that is the view that we find um, that is being endorsed by Bill Craig. Not a good start.
Now, anybody who takes the Bible to be historical has got to wrestle with these difficult texts. The question is, how could a God who is all loving, all good, and all holy issue such commands? And why would he do so?
Now, that's a great question. But the thing I just want to point out here is Craig talks about those who view the Bible as historical. And the way that he proposes or frames that, it's either all or nothing. Either you view the Bible as historical or not. And of course, that sets one up for all sorts of problems. Does that mean that you have to view the book of Jonah or the book of Job as historical in order to believe the Bible is historical? Does that commit you to thinking everything recorded in the Deuteronomic history is historical in order to view the Bible as historical? I think a far more helpful rubric for discussing these kinds of issues is recognizing the Bible as a collection of genre including the putatively historical narrative, are a collection of different genre, and you shouldn't necessarily interpret them all as historical in the way that we would today. Even more to the point, we have to recognize that there is theological weight for the historicity of some events in the Bible that is just not equivalent to other events. For example, if Jesus did not exist or if Jesus was not raised, then that goes to the very heart of Christian faith. But honestly, if Moses was not a historical person, but Jesus still incarnated in the world, died, and was raised for our sins, Christianity as such is unscarred in its essence, in its dogmatic essence, because Moses is not in the Apostles' Creed, Jesus is in the Apostles' Creed. So, right there, we have to recognize that not all matters of history within the Bible are of equal theological weight, and thus you can question the historicity of certain events in certain portions of the Bible without thereby imperiling the entire Christian faith.
Is there some kind of internal inconsistency here? And what I argued was that when you look into these in the context of the narrative, you find that God held his people Israel in Egypt for 400 years before bringing them into the land of Canaan, because he said the iniquity of the Canaanites is not yet complete. These people were not yet so debauched, so reprobate, that God would judge them. And so he held his people in abeyance until the iniquity of these Canaanite tribes was so pronounced, they were so vile and so evil, that God finally used Israel as his means of bringing judgment upon these tribes, in the same way that God would later use pagan nations like Babylon and Assyria to judge his own people, Israel, by allowing them to come in and sweep through the land and conquer the people.
Okay, we're going to stop there. And so let's just debrief that before we conclude, and then I'll be making subsequent videos going through the rest of this talk. Well, the first thing I want to say is just to come back to the point where Craig talks about how men, women, and children would all be killed if they offered resistance. Well, that's not actually what a passage like Deuteronomy 20:16-18 says. It doesn't say, go into the land and kill all the 7 tribes that remain in the land insofar as they offer resistance. Rather, it says, kill them all in the land. The actual passage says, leave alive nothing that breathes. Now, even if you could say, well, that's hyperbolic language, it is still clearly language that is conveying a command for indiscriminate mass slaughter of all individuals, civilians, men, women, and children who remain in the land. What is not mentioned in a passage like Deuteronomy 20:16-18, is to discriminate between those who offer resistance and kill them, but not kill others. So it's actually much worse than Craig has posted here. It's not only that, to use a contemporary analogy, an Israeli tank coming in the soldiers could kill the boy who throws a rock at the tank, but the soldiers could kill any boy that they find remaining within the land. That's the equivalent of what is being commanded in Deuteronomy 20:16-18. Now, I'm going to talk later on about at what point you move from ethnic cleansing to genocide, but I'm going to say already we can begin to see that we're getting perilously close to genocide. So Craig's view now is the passage that he's defending, a passage like Deuteronomy 20, is to have the mass killing of men, women, and children, not if they just offer resistance, but if they just happen to be in the land. And that could include an elderly person or a physically handicapped person, somebody who is simply unable to get out of the land, to escape the advancing armies of the Israelite soldiers. They would be warranted in killing those people because they had remained in the land. Now, the next thing that Craig says then is, well, but God waited for 400 years to allow their sins to accrue to a point where it was warranted to kill them in terms of mass slaughter. And I'll simply say here, every time people try to warrant crimes against humanity, there's typically one of two rationales or apologetics for those actions of these crimes against humanity, of mass killing of civilians. And often you can have both present. The first one is to argue that the target group that is being targeted, annihilated, attacked, destroyed is that they are somehow intrinsically less than the other group. They're less than fully human. And so dehumanizing language like cockroaches, as used in Rwanda, or vermin, another common term often used in the history of genocide, as David Livingston Smith in his book Less Than Human says, this is the rhetoric of genocide, to objectify, dehumanize, treat as less than human the very people that you want to destroy. The other rationale or explanation is to say that they have some degree of great moral culpability and threat toward us, that they've done something very terrible against us and that warrants us destroying them utterly. You hear what Craig is clearly appealing to is that latter case, is that these are irredeemably evil people who've accrued several hundred years of evil and wickedness, and that warrants engaging in mass slaughter of the civilian population that remains in the land that did not escape the advancing Israelite armies. And just imagine applying again that kind of rationale to conflicts in the world today. So, in the 1994 Rwandan genocide, there were decades and decades and decades of conflict between Hutus and Tutsis. And from a Hutu perspective, the Tutsis had accrued decades of offense against the Hutus. They were a corrupt and irredeemable people who had been complicit with colonial powers for years and had oppressed the Hutus. And the Hutus then used this as warrant to justify slaughtering, butchering Tutsi civilians. That's just not that different from what Craig is describing here. Explanation that the Canaanites are irredeemably evil, wicked people. They pose a threat to the Israelites. They've accrued decades and even centuries of sin and evil among their people, such that it warrants the mass extermination of them as a civilian population. And I'm going to say that our skepticism should be extremely heightened whenever you have these kinds of rationales. The fact is that if you are engaging in war crimes against other people by slaughtering women and children and non-combatant men, and you're saying it's because they're so evil, then you yourself are spattered with the blood of your own moral incoherence, because you are inflicting upon them the very evil that you claim that they threaten to you. That's gaslighting taken to the nth degree. And that is essentially what Craig is describing here. And that's what we have to conclude in the first 2 minutes of his video discussing, did the Bible, God command genocide in the Bible? So I will be making further videos to go through the remainder of this video. I want to make you aware that I have a link to his video below so you can watch the full thing in sequence if you want. And I've also linked my book below. I would encourage you to get Jesus Loves Canaanites if you want to learn and read more about this.